What if you could just walk away from everything? Today, we're going to dive into the incredible true story of a man who did exactly that. He just vanished into the woods and didn't speak to another human being for almost 30 years. It's a story that's going to make you question, well, pretty much everything you think you know about society, survival, and what it means to be free. 27 years. Just let that sink in for a second. That's a quarter of a century without a single real conversation. In all that time, Christopher Knight spoke exactly one word to another person: hi. So where does a story like this even begin? Well, before the world knew his name, he was just a ghost, a local legend. For decades, this tiny community in North Pond, Maine, they knew something was out there. Things would go missing from cabins, but this wasn't your typical burglar, not even close. And that was the big question, right? Who was this person? This phantom left behind way more questions than clues. People had all sorts of ideas. Maybe a Vietnam vet who couldn't readjust, some kid playing a long-term prank, or was it something else altogether? But here's what made this whole thing so weird. This ghost, he wasn't malicious. He'd steal stuff, yeah, but only what he absolutely needed to survive. Propane for his stove, food, batteries, and a lot of books. He never trashed the places. In fact, sometimes he'd accidentally break something and, get this, he'd fix it. And that's how he went from being just a thief to this full-blown local legend. Okay, so after almost 3 decades, the legend is about to meet reality. The myth was finally about to become a man. It's time for the capture, time to finally see the face behind the mystery. I mean, this timeline is just staggering. 1986. Think about that for a second. The internet wasn't really a thing for most people. So this 20-year-old kid, Christopher Knight, he drives his car deep into the woods, leaves the keys inside, and just walks away. And poof, gone. For 27 years. Can you even imagine the shock to his system? His first night in jail? That was the first time he had slept indoors with a real roof over his head since he was a 20-year-old. Just like that, his entire world, a life he had built for nearly 30 years, it was over. So this brings up the obvious question: how the heck did he do it? I mean, we're talking about Maine winters here, brutally cold, way below zero, and he never lit a fire, not once, because he was terrified the smoke would give him away. Well, the simple answer, and it's a controversial one, is that he stole things. A lot of things. The police figure it was about 1,000 burglaries over the years. But we're not talking about your average smash and grab. Oh no, these were operations. He was like a ghost surgeon. His process was incredible. First, he'd just watch a place for weeks, learning the family's schedule inside and out. Then he'd only make his move at night, usually when it was raining, to wash away his tracks. He had a whole kit for picking locks and had keys to tons of cabins. And here's the kicker. He'd sometimes borrow a canoe to get to a place, and when he was done, he'd return it and sprinkle pine needles on it so it looked like no one had ever touched it. The level of detail is just insane. And you know who was most impressed? The police who were trying to catch him. They had this sort of grudging respect for him. I mean, they couldn't help but be in awe of his discipline, calling him a master thief because he could get in and out without leaving a single trace. Okay, so we've covered the how, but that leads us to the biggest question of all, the why. Why would a perfectly normal 20-year-old just abandon his entire life? And it wasn't for some grand reason you might think. He wasn't protesting the government. He wasn't on some spiritual quest. The answer is, well, it's a lot weirder and more personal than that. Even Knight himself had a hard time explaining it. He just said he felt this intense gravitational pull to be completely alone. He called it unconditional solitude. It wasn't about running from something. It was about running to something. Just pure aloneness. There was no manifesto, no big plan. He just left. And this, right here, is the absolute heart of the story. Knight said that when there was no one around to see him, he lost his identity. There was no audience, no one to perform for. Think about that. All the little ways we perform for each other every day, for him, that just melted away. And what was left? He said it was total freedom. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How much of who we are is just a show we put on for other people. And here's a crazy paradox for you. The exact thing that Knight chose, this state he described as peaceful and perception enhancing, well, That's what we use in our prisons as the most extreme punishment you can get: solitary confinement. One man's freedom is literally another man's torture. Wild. And whatever you do, don't try to compare him to Thoreau. Knight had absolutely no time for that. He basically called Thoreau a poser, a dilettante. His reasoning? Thoreau was only out at Walden Pond for 2 years, and his mom would come by and do his laundry and bring him snacks. For Knight, that was not the real deal. So once he's caught, the world suddenly has to figure out what to do with this guy. What do you make of him? He's not a violent monster, but he's definitely not innocent either. So what is he? A hero? A hermit? A thief? The truth is, it really depends on who you ask. I mean, public opinion was all over the map. You had one camp that saw him as this total folk hero, a symbol of freedom and rugged survival. But then you had the people he actually stole from. For them, he wasn't a hero. He was a 27-year-long source of stress and violation. And then, of course, a bigger, more critical conversation started happening. Would we be telling the story the same way, with the same sympathy, if he wasn't a white guy? You know, even the court system was scratching its head. The prosecutor actually argued against a long prison sentence. He said it would be uniquely cruel to lock up a man who had chosen absolute freedom for that long. And in the end, he only got 7 months in jail, most of which he'd already served. And that's really what this whole story leaves you with, right? This massive question. This guy turned his back on everything we're told is important: jobs, friends, family, all of it. And in that silence, he found a kind of contentment that most of us spend our whole lives chasing. So what does it say about the world that we've built, when for one person, the only way to be truly free was to leave it completely?